स्टार्ट करिए सर। राहुल सर
स्टार्ट करो सर।
स्टार्ट करिए।
Yes, yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Professor Haresh Barot, the session chairman, and CA Tauwfiq Wahidi, the speaker for today.
Thank you.
Very good evening. It is great to see you all. Thank you for coming here today. We are here for some study and insights about the topic practical challenges during interviews, interrogation. When should formal interviews be conducted? Importance of informal discussion and its nitty-gritty, documentation of the discussions with suspects, targets, hearsay, and its role in conducting forensic audit investigation. I am Rahul Agrawal and practicing chartered accountant. I am pleased to be with you all this evening and have a chance to introduce our dear speaker and the session chairman. So I will quickly introduce. Yes. Allow me a minute, sir.
Yeah. Hi Tauwfiq, how are you?
How are you, sir?
Good to see you. Everything okay?
All fine, sir. All fine. I hope you're doing good.
Yeah, very well. So where is who else is there? You have started or not yet?
No, I'm just yeah. I'll go ahead and introduce our session chairman. Session chairman is Mr. Haresh Barot. Dr. Barot is an associate dean and associate professor at National Forensic Sciences University, Gujarat, India. He holds doctorate degree in management. He has more than 20 years of experience in academics. His expertise in the areas of forensic accounting, financial management, and mutual funds. He has more than 35 research publications, 4 books, and 9 case studies of international and national repute to his credit. He has attended more than 20 FDPs at IIM Kozhikode, NMIMS Mumbai, HP University Shimla, etc., to name a few. Welcome, Haresh ji. Warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot.
Today's speaker is Mr. Tauwfiq Wahidi. I will now go ahead and introduce him to you all. By qualification, he's a chartered accountant, postgraduation in Indian School of Business, certified fraud examiner, also holds a certificate in data analytics of ACCA, has done diploma in information systems audit, DISA, and has certification in forensic accounting and fraud prevention. Has also got certification in anti-money laundering, and his areas of specialization, forensic and risk advisory services. So he's a director in the forensic practice at the Mumbai office. He's an experienced forensic auditor with an overall experience of more than 9 years. He has worked on large-scale forensic audits for various banks and financial institutions. He has worked on assignments of various industries like telecom, power, entertainment, and manufacturing, to name a few. He has directed the fund trails worth billions of rupees to find end utilization and discovered accounting frauds in some of the India's biggest corporate bankruptcies. His investigation experience includes working with central bodies and institutions on suspected embezzlements and tax evasions. He is an alumnus of the Indian School of Business, which is one of the world's highest ranking business schools. He is also certified fraud examiner and chartered accountant, as I also said before. In addition to this, he holds various other certifications and degrees in forensic accounting, money laundering, and data analysis. Quite an introduction there. Welcome, Tauwfiq ji.
Thank you.
Over to you for today's session.
Great. Harish, sir, do you want to start the session or should I go ahead?
Yes, I think we have more than 50 attendees, so we can go ahead and start the session.
Okay.
With permission of Haresh ji also. Haresh ji, can we start the session, please?
Sir, please start.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. My screen is visible, right?
Yeah, your screen is visible.
Yes, sir, very visible.
Great. Thank you. So, first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this workshop on forensic accounting, the interview techniques. A special welcome to Mr. Harish Barot, who's session chairman today. Rahul, thank you for the introduction, and Mr. Mitil Chokshi, who is my first mentor, and I'm very nervous to be presenting this in front of him. So, let me quickly start. I'm trying to minimize this window. Yeah, okay, thrown it at the bottom. So our today's session covers more of a practical side. We have kept the theory outside the purview. We'll of course be developing a theoretical base, but we'll talk more about from a practical perspective what are the challenges we face and what actual interviewing looks like and how you should, you know, in an interview situation go about conducting an interview. My presentation is visible to all, right, and not the screen?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Okay. Great. So this is a brief slide for the contents about what we will be discussing today. We'll start with a background of what interviews are and how they're conducted. We'll move on to the timing of the interviews. We'll also have a small discussion on informal discussions and why they are important. And then we'll discuss the documentation of interviews, what notes you should make, and how to use hearsay in forensic accounting investigations. So basically, what are what are interviews, and why are they conducted? So all of us know that interviews are, are a communication. Basically, they are a two-way communication between a person who wants to know something and another person who probably doesn't want to tell something. But that's what interviews are. And from an investigation perspective, or even from a job seeking perspective, in the purpose, the role, and the purpose of interviews again does not really change. Interviews still are a mechanism by which information is exchanged by way of small questions, by way of persuasion, and if needed, by way of interrogations. So interviews are a structured meeting between two individuals or more than two individuals for eliciting information, and that is the common thread. It's only a structured meeting. And when we say interviews are structured, what we are trying to hint at is that interviews don't happen by chance. They are not a general discussion. They are not ordinary conversation between two people, but they have a context. They have a specific purpose, an objective for occurring. And the whole discussion, whatever happens during an interview, the whole talk, the whole communication is bound by the objective of that interview, is bound by that structure, the objective which is stated at the beginning. So interviews are generally conducted either in an investigation parlance. Interviews have mainly two reasons to be conducted. One is either to gather some information, you want to know something to carry on your investigation, or you already know a lot and you want to make the person confess. These are the two broad reasons why you would get on in a room with a person during an investigation. The difference between interviews and interrogation is more of a contextual one. It's based on the basis is the reason why we would be discussing matters with a person, either to gain information, at which point it's an interview, or to get a confession, at which point it becomes an interrogation with that person. The force of or the aggressiveness that you display between interviews and interrogations might vary, but it need not. Interviews can be as aggressive as interrogations, or interrogations can be as soft and easy as interviews are supposed to be, or as civil, should I say. What are the requirements of conducting in interviews? Interviews should be conducted with due planning and preparation. I think planning is the most important part in an interview, and the entire success of your interview depends on how well you have planned it. So when you're preparing for an make a list of items that you would need to discuss, at least to the interviewer, not necessarily to the interviewee. The objective of the interview, the reason for the interview should be very, very clear. Some people would go in and tell you that, oh, don't have questions, don't write down questions which you're going to ask, let the conversation flow. And that is very important in an interview, letting the conversation flow, but at the same time having a set of questions that you want answers to gives a lot of context and helps you to plan for an interview. The second, another important thing is to review your case files, to review all the evidence that you already have, review all the information that is available with you before you get in with the person to ask questions. Obviously, the level of your planning, the level of your preparation should not ideally vary with with the rank or the person you are dealing with. But if you are planning to interview very high level people in the organization, it's very important to understand their perspective, the kind of oversight they would have. So as an interviewer, you should make your questions appropriate for them. So if you're interviewing very low level people, ground force, mid-level managers who do the things more practically, they may not have a strategical overview, which can only come from interviews of senior people. So if you're interviewing the senior people, asking them questions more about the strategy, about the overall management, about the risk net frameworks, makes more sense than asking questions about individual documentations. Another thing which you want to discuss in an interview, which you want to decide beforehand on an interview, is where to conduct the interview. The venue of an interview assumes importance, because if the interview is at a very unfamiliar place, the interviewee might be uncomfortable and may not be open or willing to share the information. But on the flip side, if it's too comfortable, let's say the interview is at the interviewee's home, he may again not share much information, because he's too familiar with the surroundings, he's too much into his comfort zone and doesn't feel the need to cooperate. So an ideal venue would be at which the interviewee can be reasonably comfortable and approachable, is not full of too many distractions, so as to make the interview a futile exercise, and also doesn't provide a sense and also provides a sense of security to the interviewee that whatever is being said is confidential, is not accessible to others except the interviewer. Gaining the trust of the interviewee remains a critical part of the entire discussion that we do during an interview, and the venue has a very important role to play. So, for example, if you are conducting an interview in a room which is all glass walls, the interviewee will probably be distracted by the things moving outside. He may also be scared of the people who are sitting outside, may also catch visions of other people looking at him, and thus may not be able to share information. But at the same time, if you're conducting an interview in a completely closed space, which looks intimidating or physically restraining, that one may not be legal in all circumstances, and also might frighten the interviewer into submission and not giving out true and fair information, which ideally they would in a setting like a conference room or in a room where they are familiar with and room where they are more comfortable. Selecting the right interviewee is so when we say you have to select the right interviewee, your planning for the interview depends on whom are you going to ask the questions. So as we mentioned, asking questions to the senior and top management differs from asking questions, and the kind of preparation you would do for asking questions to the lower management. So the importance of selecting the right interviewee determines how you plan and prepare for the interview going on. At the same time, have a brief outline of what all points need to be discussed during an interview. So many people go into an interview and do not get enough information from the interview because the discussion tends to flow in different directions. The discussions tend to move around a lot, and there is no structure given to the discussion. So it is incumbent on an interviewer to keep bringing the discussion back to the focal point, to be polite and civil about it, but at the same time be very focused on what they want to achieve out of the interview. And of course, what documents do you bring into an interview setting? You do not want to bring too many documents into the interview or into the interview room, which gives an idea to the interviewer that, oh, these guys have come loaded and these guys have come planned or something, which is again intimidating to the interviewer. But also you don't want to come empty-handed so that you don't even have your own notes. It's advisable to carry a set of notes into the interview room, which you can refer back to and ask questions. Again, the kind of document that you bring is very contextual and depends on the stage of your stage at which you are conducting this interview. We will of course discuss the timings of the interview after this, but briefly, bringing evidences into the interview room means that the interviewee might have a chance to look at might snip a glance at other documents, and if in case you're willing to risk that, only then bring more and more documents, more evidentiary documents into the interview room. Otherwise, bring as little documents as needed into the interview room. And as always, as the most vulnerable witness should be interviewed before you witness the more reluctant witness. See, like we discussed, the basis of the basic and the reason of conducting an interview is to gain more information. Sometimes if your interviewee is very reluctant and you know that this person is quite reluctant to share information, it may not make a lot of sense to interview that person first when you do not have enough context as an investigator, when you do not have enough information or evidence as an investigator. Even if the person is not a suspect, even if the person is even if the interview is being conducted to just gather information, but by your interaction, by your impression, the person who's gonna share the information is going to be very reluctant. it always makes sense to interview that person later on, so that you have your case file and you have enough talking points to coax the person into providing more information, so that you can ask the questions, you can ask for more information in various ways, which can only come after you have you have spoken to a bunch of other people before getting into a room with such a person. So when should interviews be conducted, and how do you determine when to conduct an interview? Broadly, there are three aspects to determining the object and determining the timing of your interview. One is the objective of the interview. Why do you want to conduct the interview? The second is the nature of your suspicion and the strength of your convictions over here, as Julia Child would say. And the third is the availability of data. All these three factors, I mean, they can be more factors, but I think these are the three primary factors which determine when you would go ahead and conduct interviews. If the objective of your interview is to gather information, you would obviously try to have an interview much early on in the investigation process. See, the idea behind this interview is to only gather information. Oftentimes, in case of corporate investigations, you're called to advise on a risk process, and then the management feels like, oh, we do not, we think there is some sort of a fraud over here. Can you help us find the guilty person? When you are in such a situation, you and many organizations, you know from your experience, do not have written SOPs. They do not have a very strong of risk mapping framework, which you can take on as sort of for a process review. So to understand the process, even to understand who does what or who knew what, you would want to conduct some interviews, and you would want to have an understanding of the process. So for this information gathering, gathering information from various people, conducting interviews in the beginning makes a lot of sense. But if you have already obtained a lot of evidence of, say, for example, in a white collar crime involving a lot of bank documents, involving a lot of fund trail, for which you have a lot of documents already examined, you have a lot of documents already taken in, the interviews can be conducted towards the end, because you have a lot of third-party documents or a lot of evidence which has already been collected. The strength of your evidence will determine when to conduct and why do you want to conduct this interview. So again, this boils down to nature of your suspicion. If you have a very random suspicion that, oh, this person might be involved, or I see a fraud in this department, if you have more of a suspicion on the cost center rather than focusing on one particular individual, focusing on early interviews might give you a lot of insight early on in the process, because you would the suspicion, because frankly you do not have a suspect in mind. Also also the rank of the person in the organization is very important in this situation, because people from higher senior level management usually are offended if if you approach them for information gathering, because a lot of this information can be gathered from juniors in the organization. So instead of if your suspicion is very broad based, if your suspicion is not concrete, going ahead and interviewing the senior management might actually tip them off and not play in your benefit if you are conducting an investigation in a corporate, especially in a corporate with a very rigid hierarchy. And the availability of data, as we discussed, data is kind of very critical. But if you do not have enough data to go ahead for the investigation, or sometimes you may not even know what data should you ask for, what are the kind of documents that the organization maintains, because sometimes if you ask for generic things, can I have your risk map or can I have your risk register? Many organizations look at you very suspiciously as, what are you even asking for? But so to get an understanding of what are the kind of things that you can ask for in an organization, and this is more valid for corporate investigation, where you are investigating things within an organization rather than your forensic audit or your investigation has been mandated by a third party, because many banks, financiers, or financial institutions would have a standard set of documents which you can definitely ask for. But if you do not have adequate information in the beginning to begin or to conduct your investigation, conducting interviews of people early on would make sense rather than conducting interviews much later on in the process. So let's do a case study and see what we decided in this case. This is a real life case study. So there was an organization in which the management suspected the warehousing and logistics team to have done some sort of fishy thing. They were facing a lot of problems with the current warehouse and the procurement system. The orders were delayed and stuff like that was happening. So they wanted to have uh, a review of what exactly is happening, or is there someone who's rigging the game in in this. So initially, the management had no evidence of any person who could be a prime suspect in this in this whole process. But they wanted to make sure that there was nobody in the organization who's getting a kickback for working at a subpar level. So for collecting the kind of information, because the organization did not have any documents, did not have any standard operating procedures, did not follow very rigid rules. It was more sort of an organization that had grown over the years. And whenever you have organizations which have taken on processes as they grow, they usually do not have a very rigid backbone to support those organizations. And same was the case with this one. So initially so what we did is so to start asking for data to get an idea of what sort of data we should be looking for and what sort of data would be available with the organization, we started with the interviews. And in this case, we started with the top level interviews first, because we wanted to understand how they see the organization and how they run, or rather how they want to run the organization, rather than how the organization is being run on the ground, which came later. So our decision was in this case to go for early interviews rather than later ones. So when you are at a information gathering stage, there are a few things which you should which you should look at as a personality trait, rather than as a typical investigator. It helps to think of yourself more in the role of an internal auditor who is asking for data for a very regular process review. We are not investigators at this point. We are only asking for information to get started. We do not have a suspicion, especially if you have a suspicion. You do not want the interviewees to feel that you have a suspicion. You want to appear very benign. You want to appear very approachable. Being approachable is something which auditors must develop as a skill, because it's very easy to appear to be a frightening or a scary auditor, whether internal, statutory, forensic, any sort of auditor. But it takes a lot of effort to be an auditor who is friendly, who is approachable, because they are the kind of auditors who get more data from the clients in all situations. But if you are in if you have all the data, you have taken all the evidence, and you are now at a stage where you can confront, and you are looking for to pin the blame on someone, you're looking to get a confession from this is a sort of thing which usually happens in an internal investigation, post which the organization would decide what to do with the suspect, whether to fire them or ask them to leave, or ask them to serve the notice or replace them, transfer them to another place, to another department. So in such a confrontational interview, it is important to ask very pointed questions, being nice and being approachable, or whatever you did for in the information gathering stage, carrying on with the same personality over here might actually not play in your benefit, because there is a chance that the individual that you are dealing with over here could be the main suspect, and hence could manipulate you or digress a lot from the topic, and make the interview not a worthwhile exercise. So so for this stage, it's recommended to ask very pointed questions, to display the evidence, and to keep the track of the investigation in your control, of the interview in your control, rather than letting the interviewee decide what to discuss, or rather than interviewee having a lot to influence the flow of the conversation in an interview. So in a confrontational interview, what would be a sort of a typical situation? The respondent would ideally be in a denial mode, saying that I'm not responsible for this, or this is not my job. And then you would display some evidence which points to the fact that they did something, in this case, duplicate the invoice, in this case, duplicating the invoice. And so what's the tactics over here? If you look at the last line over here, this is let's just try to work this out, but you've got to help me. The interviewer is confronting with evidence and making the interviewee very or trying to bring the interviewee onto their side and asking for help, but actually they're not really looking to be helped in any case, because they already have the evidence which is against the interviewee. What they're trying to do is to get the interviewee to cooperate, so that they can extract either a confession, or they can get to the base of the story without having to prolong the interview. And in this situation, asking for help or appearing to looking for some assistance from the interviewee would mean that the interviewee ideally tries to open up a little more, give some more information, which can be taken ahead in the investigation process. So this was about our formal interviews. How and when do we conduct formal interviews? Let's have a look at the informal side of interviews, and when do we conduct, or how do we conduct an informal discussion, and are informal discussions really important when you are an investigator? So yeah. So as I said earlier on, a lot of people do not get enough information out in interviews because one important thing that they miss out is being approachable. They do not appear endearing enough to the audience, to the interviewee, that that the person would try to open up to them or share more information for them. So when you are conducting an informal discussion, one of the key factors to look into is the personality of the fraud examiner. I think all of us know people who we would never have an informal discussion with. We would just never sit across a table in the office canteen with them and just discuss things or just talk about stuff. And that is exactly the kind of personality you do not want in a fraud examiner, because if you're too intimidating, because if you are too aggressive, the chances of you hearing what the other person wants to say are way too less. You only would get to hear what you want to hear. The other person, the interviewee, would try to run away from you, and that's not the goal of an interviewer. That's not what the interviewer should hope for. What we want, especially in an informal discussion, is to let the conversation flow. We want the conversation to be light and easy. Cracking a joke here and there is not going to not off the charts over here. What we want is to let the conversation be very light. We want the conversation to be uh, very driven by the perspective of the interviewee, because that's what we are looking for. Again, one important thing to understand over here is that the informal discussions need not actually be accidental or just by the way happening. They can be an orchestrated, a very well choreographed interaction with the person, where you want certain information, where you want to get to know the person a little better before calling them into a formal discussion. So it's not a perchance meeting or something that just happened. It's a decided confrontation, but a very civil, a very polite, a very friendly confrontation, where you uh, uh, come across someone in the office canteen, or you come across someone in a setting where they are not intimidated by your presence. So the body language of the fraud examiner, how you approach the person, how close you sit to that person, or how far you are, so that they're just yelling. Those things are important in an informal discussion. Think about talking to your colleagues. Think about talking to your. There's obviously with a fraud examiner or with an investigator who's typically come from from another organization, who's typically an outsider. They may not be so friendly. They may not be so open at first, but it's the personality. It's building a rapport. Building a rapport has often been called the heart and soul of the interview. So building that rapport with the interviewee is extremely critical in conducting a successful formal interview and a very beneficial informal discussion. When you're conducting informal discussions, what you should ideally do is let the interviewee decide the flow of the flow of the conversation. You don't want to counter, you don't want to stop or ask questions, or definitely do not present any sort of evidence to them. Oh, but I've heard this. Oh, you want to hear, you want to say things like, oh, is that true? You want to talk about things like ask them to reinforce what they are saying, rather than what others have said, and seek validations. Locations for such interactions is again very important, because you do not have, sorry, informal by chance meetings in the office cabins. It usually doesn't happen. Informal discussions come at informal, casual places. So around the office space, maybe the office canteen, maybe the office coffee house. And those are the places where you can meet someone and have a genuine appearing informal discussion. And the language used, of course. If you are too formal, if you are too high and mighty in your language, the other person may not even talk to you, let alone conducting an informal discussion, or let alone be interested in having a discussion which has nothing to do with work. One good important point here is that if you know the mother tongue, if you have a common native language, or a native or a regional dialect which both of you share, and you know that the other person will not, one, be offended, will not find it suspicious that you have just switched to a native language and not the official language, which in most Indian contexts is English or Hindi. It's beneficial to use a regional language, or to find a common ground from which you can build a discussion, from which you can start a discussion and move it to more formal office or suspicion related scenes. So uh, so the important takeaway from this is that the interviewer should appear to be very, very friendly, very approachable, and only then you will have a successful informal discussion. If your informal discussion is with a person who's way too senior to you, is has a perception of being extremely senior, then the person may not be interested in having an informal discussion. I mean, how many times have you had informal discussions with the boss of your boss, for example? So the kind of information that you would normally expect from informal discussion would be one very perspective based. It's the opinions of that person on the organization. So what you're looking for is clues and leads about what people think about one person, or how organized they are, or how the practices usually actually flow. Sometimes, and in fact often in organizations, you'll find that the stated process is one stream, but the actual thing is slightly different. And if you are having discussions only in a formal setting, you might only come to know what the formal system is, what the SOPs state, but how does it really happen? Who's the main decision makers? Who are the key people in the hierarchy? These are the kind of discussions that that come up in uh, a informal discussion. The evidence that we collect, the information, and not evidence, I'm sorry, the information that you collect would only be persuasive and not conclusive. You are looking for hints, you're looking for clues, you're looking for leads to point your organization, point your investigation to a more fruitful conclusion, rather than looking for direct evidence. It may come sometimes, people open up so much that they might actually give you direct evidence during an informal discussion as a sort of a tip, as a sort of anonymous hint. And they may ask you not to be named, but they might provide you, or they might give you a very direct path to very good evidence during an informal discussion. But if even if that's not happening, what you're looking for is getting to know the organization a little better from the inside, through the eyes of people uh, who talk to you at a more casual or at a more informal level. Again, what to watch out for during informal discussions is the fact that some of these leads can be dead ends, can be false positives or false leads, and through more testing, through more through further investigation, you'd be able to separate those from the good ones. So we'll continue with our case study over here. So let's say you now have conducted a formal interviews. You've got the process down. You've seen the organization. You wanted some more data. You have collected that data from the organizer, from your formal interviews which you conducted early on. And now you want to look into a few individuals. Like you have narrowed down to, okay, these are my 3 or 4 people who are my key suspects. And if something's wrong with over here, if someone has taken a kickback, it would be these one out of these 3 people. It cannot be everyone. So how do you take an informal discussion and use that as a lead generator? So what you would do is you would probably ask, with a person who's willing to share some information, with a person who is more endearing to you. You would ask normal questions. You'd keep the conversation light. And again, you're not going behind the back of that person and forcing them into giving you information. You're not backstabbing that person and destroying your personal relationships with them, but you're only discussing the organization with them, something they would know and something they would expect, that since this person is an investigator and would be discussing the processes with me, so that's not a far off expectation to have. But at the same time, you are looking for certain cues and certain leads from their answers. So for example, you ask a question like, what's the schedule around here? Are you guys really busy? Do you guys work long hours? or who's the ultimate decision maker, or it appears like these are like 5-6 people are taking decisions. Everyone appears very experienced in the organization. Who's the key person, or who's the new one, or are promotions easy to come by in this organization? Now, this is only getting to know the policies, the structure, the culture of the organization as such. But the answers, the answers given in the case study here are made up, but that's how people would usually react to them. Who's the ultimate decision maker? People would say Mr. ABC are the important ones. We all just follow their orders, or we all just follow the orders of one person who's a micromanager, or somebody who gets business done, or somebody who approves the bills. So these are the cues which, as an investigator, should be of a lot of interest to you, because if somebody's coming out to be the kingmaker in an organization, if somebody's coming out to be the ultimate authority, or somebody's coming out to be an unchecked person, a loose cannon, then involving that person into your further investigations, into your further leads, makes sense, because given absolute authority, the propensity of conducting a fraud is much higher. I think there is also an ACFE survey that points to similar finding, that people high up in the organization usually, and people who are in a position to circumvent the controls, have a larger probability of conducting large-scale frauds. One more thing which is critical in an informal discussion is, and actually for a formal discussion as well, is using kinesics. So in kinesics, what you do is you look at the body language of the person, the kind of words that they're using, their hand gestures, their physical movements, and how they say, how they frame their sentences. Now, a lot of these kinesics of, say, for example, breaking eye contact, which usually is considered deception, or using the eyebrows, or keeping your head down, which is usually considered submissive. A lot of these kinesics is extremely culture-based. In certain cultures, when speaking to seniors or to show formality, people would speak in different ways than they would in certain other cultures. So, for example, it's pretty common in Indian cultures to, for example, keep your head down when speaking to your seniors. This may not be the case when you're dealing with people from a more westernized culture, but that is not an admission, but that generally is not an admission of guilt. So when you are dealing with kinesics, it's important to have, if you're looking, to analyze the body language of the suspects, or body language of your interviewers, it's important to understand that there is a part of psychology that plays into it, which is across cultures, across geographies, but sometimes, many times, it's also a cultural thing. So crossing arms and legs is usually assumed to be a defensive posture, where somebody is trying to distance themselves from the discussion, where somebody is trying to be not so involved. That's when they would cross their arms. But sometimes people may not actually cross their arms and legs, because again, it's considered rude in certain cultures, in some sectors, to sit across somebody with your legs crossed. So the important thing to note is that there is not one single behavior that proves anything. It has to be a sum of various behaviors, a sum of various hints and indications that should lead to a suspicion, if at all any. And kinetic interviewing may not be as reliable with all the groups as it would be with some groups. We move on to the documentation of the interview. So once you have a good case building up, or you have done a lot of procedures. A lot of our documentation in investigations is the documentation of our um, procedures, rather than the documentation of what other people have said. It's very important to keep a case file which is recorded on the go, which is updated on the go. I'm sorry, so that anytime you want to look back or check your notes for a further line to explore a new line, you're not relying on memory. The key ways to do documentation are recording the interviews, taking notes, discussing on the opinions. We'll discuss on the opinions and the questions and the results of the interview. So for recording the interviews, first thing to consider is the legality of recording an interview. You cannot, as it's a legal protocol rather than a matter of etiquette to ask for permission before recording. You should never have a non-permitted recording which you can present in uh, not sorry, an unapproved recording which you should put in your case file or as used as evidence. Now in India, there is no law that prohibits people from recording without the other person's knowledge. So so sometimes the courts allow such such a recording into the evidence, but there is a chance of this coming up with um, a lot of backlash in terms of infringement of privacy, a lot of legal problems for the interviewer. So it's always good to ask for permission before recording an interview and let the other person know that this is being recorded. So for note taking, it's slightly easier. You should take frequent notes during an interview. Note taking is an activity that happens across the table, so there is a tacit approval from the interviewee. In case the interviewee does not want something to be noted or does not want something to be recorded on paper, they can always object to it, and as a matter of courtesy, more as a matter of courtesy rather than as an investigator, you would sometimes allow that. But if it's a material thing, make sure that all the material points discussed are in your notes. It's also a very important practice, or a very good practice, to circulate notes of the interview if you can and if you are allowed to do that. So in case you have interviewed people and you've gathered some information which was either not recorded or was you were not taking live notes, so as an investigator, you can always circulate that as a minutes of the meeting, and once the other person gives a consent to it, yes, I agree with this is what we discussed. You can always take those notes and put them in the put those minutes in the report that you are making, because then you have the other person's approval of as a record that this was what was discussed in the meeting. Opinions for any investigation, it's very important to be as objective as possible. The investigator should not have should not make opinions definitely not in the report, and should not let his judgment be clouded by the kind of opinions by his own opinions about the interviewee. Questions. For questions, it's recommended not to have a predetermined list of questions, but let the conversation flow freely. But as we discussed early on, having a brief idea about what questions you want to ask and what answers you are seeking in an interview helps to keep the structure of the interview intact, and helps to give you a lot of context to the interview. So if you want to prepare questions, don't at the initial stage, it's not useful to have very pointed questions that you just want answers to, because such a stance usually is intimidating to the interviewee, and the success of getting good answers, the success of chances of getting usable answers are accordingly reduced. Results, whatever has been discussed in an interview, you should explain the results. You should put down the results as soon as possible after concluding the interview. This is more of an exercise where you are building your own evidence or case book rather than relying on memory about, oh, this person also said that, or this person might have also said this. So it's important to keep the results objectively written down. In case sometimes we walk from an interview with very little information but with a lot of opinions on that person, it's very important for an investigator to keep his subjective opinions, subjective impressions about the interviewee separate from the objective side of it, the kind of things he can prove with an evidence, because opinions usually do not have an evidentiary value. And the same goes for hearsay. So hearsay is actually a very important part of what we do, what we get come across in an interview. Often when you're interviewing people, often when you are talking to a lot of people, especially in an informal discussion, the chances are quite high that what the person is saying is what everyone is saying and has no evidentiary base, or something which cannot be proved. So oftentimes you'll get to know what's on the grapevine. You'll get to know what the gossip is going around. But and as an investigator, you should be open to listening to that, but not acting on hearsay, because hearsay is not permissible as an evidence, and it's not uh, correct, both legally and both professionally, to make judgments based on what hearsay is. So hearsay is something which is not directly heard, which is not something to which you are a witness, but it has been heard from third parties, or the rumor that's going around, or uh, something which is not directly you are in the know of. So hearsay usually can have two parts to it, or two aspects to it. Hearsay, it can either be objective or subjective. Objective, I define objective hearsay as something which can be relevant to the case, which you have heard from other parties, and but can be proved. If you pursue that line of investigation, you will come across the source for that. Say, for example, you hear somebody has an FIR lodged against him. You can always go and check the FIR rather than relying on, oh, that person told me there's an FIR. If somebody told you there's an FIR filed against a person, you can always get a copy of that, get a record of that, and it no longer remains a hearsay because it's grounded in reality. But sometimes hearsay can be subjective, as in the opinions of and very strong opinions at that. Some people in the organization are always infamous. Oh, that person is known to be dishonest, or conversely, that person is known to be honest, and nobody wants to believe that the honest person took a kickback. But as an investigator, it's your role, it's your responsibility to not listen to any such subjective opinions of people going around, but to have a more but to have an evidence-based opinion on the proceedings, to have something which can be proved rather than what is generally accepted. And this is something that very frequently happens, especially about top management people who've been in the organization for a very long time, that there's generally a very good positive vibe about them in the organization going around, and nobody wants to believe anything to the contrary. There are certain exceptions to the to admitting hearsay as hearsay as an evidence. One is res gestae. Res gestae is when an unrelated event is so close or relevant to the main to the event in under question, to the event being investigated, that that is admissible and that is considered to be a part of the same transaction or to be a part of the same event, it's admissible as hearsay. Let's say, for example, the spontaneous reaction of onlookers or spontaneous reaction of people, which is not deliberated, or people, or when they do not have had time to change or modify their opinions or modify their to conduct themselves in some particular way. So any the spontaneous reactions or spontaneous expressions are usually admissible as an evidence, and they're not considered hearsay because of the res gesta rule. Confessions are confessions which are admissions of guilt are also this admissible to exception to the hearsay rule, because and even if the person is not present over there to give a confession in person, the confession can be taken on the testimony of someone else to whom the confession was given. Same goes for admissions and dying declarations. If the person is not there in person, then the admission can be taken on the testimony of the person to whom it was given. And evidence given in formal proceedings is also an exception to the hearsay rule. If a person has already given evidence and is not available to present in court, these exceptions usually work under the more so under criminal law. But in case the person is not able to be present in court to give an evidence, then then the relevant portion of an evidence given in another case can be used as an exception to the hearsay rule and is admissible as evidence, despite it being technically a hearsay. So the important takeaway here regarding hearsay, especially in corporate settings, is that hearsay introduces some level of prejudice. It's the bias, or it's the opinion of a lot of people, the gossip, the grapevine that's going ahead, and it's very important for the investigator to not be carried away with what other people say or what other people think, and is not grounded in strong examinable evidence. It's also very important for the investigator to not be influenced by the general perception or his own prejudices against certain people basis of their language, color, race, religion, or anything which is not grounded in strong evidence and cannot be used, cannot be presented as as a logical evidence to support their investigation. I think that covers my part of the day today. Any questions from the audience are welcome, and of course comments from Mr. Barot. So over to you, sir.
Yes, sir. First of all, any questions from the audience? If anybody has any questions, they can ask. Mr. Bharat, do we have any questions?
Barot sir, there are no questions currently in the chat box. Mishra ji, एक बार check करेंगे, कोई questions है तो post कर देंगे. If there would be any questions,
yes, sir,
then WRC will post it.
Sir, देख रहा हूँ.
Anyway, till now, Mr. Tauwfiq, I had gone through your session very calmly, and earlier I had also listened on some another topic. But today's session, as far as the interview and the points which has been mentioned on the flyer, practical challenges during interview and interrogation, and the sub points which had mentioned in the those topic were rightly covered, and those discussions regarding interview and techniques, all those points I had mentioned. I had written down certain points which it starts with the basics of interview, which things to be kept in mind while you are commencing the interview. Through, you shall prepare a proper plan, you shall conduct an interview with the proper objectives. It should be with some kind of, what kind of information you are seeking from an interviewee. Those things were very well covered in the sessions, and apart from it, you had taken one of the case studies, which is it extension to some other module also, which deals with the planning the interview from top to bottom. Certain approaches which are, what I understood as far as my knowledge is concerned in forensic accounting is, forensic accounting doesn't deal with only financial data analytics. One data analytics could be one part of it. There is another purview also which is to be taken into consideration. And yes, this is rightly choose topic by WIRC to select an interview topic, because certain cases there are not any informations which are available. You could not come on conclusion, come on identify that there are there are chances of malpractices or frauds into. So this is to be begin with some kind of interviewing or seeking information. So rightly mentioned those things which has been discussed, the sub points of interview, which body language, avoid countering the questions, the language which are used, the expression of the interviewer and interview also, both things which has been rightly kept in a proper consideration during the presentations also. I had just 2 to 3 points to be mentioned in this key. While dealing with the interview, all those things which you had mentioned, but the interview, when we have been conducting an interview, the interviewing questions could be bifurcated. What kind of information we are seeking? If it is an introductory kind of information, the questions could be framed accordingly. If it is an informal gatherings, informal interview, questions could be framed accordingly. If it is an admission seeking, confrontational you talked about, then accordingly the questions are to be framed. But
yes,
during an interview, those things which are to be kept in mind are rightly covered in these presentations. And I must say those points which are mentioned in WIRC sub points for this presentation have been rightly targeted and achieved by Mr. Tauwfiq. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your presentation. It was a nice presentation. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, thanks to WIRC for giving me this opportunity to present, and thank you, Mr. Barot, for your very kind words. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Chetan. Sorry, Mr. Jeswani. Yes, Mr. Tauwfiq.
I think there is one question here. How much knowledge of criminal law and procedures is essential? As far as essential is concerned, a lot of investigators, depending on the role that you are fulfilling, do not have a lot of are not lawyers per se, and it's definitely not required for you to be a lawyer. But sometimes, in an interview setting, it's very important for the investigator to understand the boundaries of his own actions. What are the kind of questions that you can possibly ask? What are the kind of questions that you should possibly not ask? And what is an appropriate behavior? Much of that is grounded in criminal law. And for us, for certain interviews, it's very I'm getting an option to turn off the webcam. Am I visible? So for certain interviews, hence your practices might differ accordingly. Let's say, for example, when you are conducting HR, when you are conducting an investigation into into the acts within an organization, it's often beneficial and very often important to keep a third person, often from the HR, to as a witness to the proceedings of this. So all of those proceedings come from somewhere in the legalities of the process, but having a knowledge, so having a basic knowledge about the criminal law, especially of the Evidence Act, is really important in being a successful interviewer and making notes for an investigation.
Exactly. Very. The second questions what we have is, if a conclusive evidence has been obtained and corroborated during interview process, why not recommend a definite course of action?
Why not recommend a definite course of action? I'm not sure I get what the question trying to say, definite course of action. But if you have a conclusive evidence and which is corroborated and can definitely acted upon. So usually, depending on the context and the reason why you're conducting the investigation, the organization would have, and I'm speaking in terms of as a in terms of an internal investigation or a white collar crime investigation. So if you have all the evidence which is conclusive and has been and can be corroborated and has no loopholes in it, then then usually it's a management decision to follow through with the organization policies. And also definite course of action is a very contextual thing. Sometimes investigators are not asked asked for what they should do with the investigation. It's only for investigators to bring up the evidence, if any exists, against or for the person or for the suspect, but not deliberate on what the organization should do. Obviously, if it's something which is illegal and the auditors or the investigators are bound to report to the law enforcement agencies, that's a whole different matter, because in that case it goes beyond the organization that to take a corrective action, and the investigators might have to approach the law enforcement if the matter is of that nature.
Exactly, agree with you, because if evidence is available and during interview process we have found the correct kind of evidence, then it could be taken to the corrective actions also. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions do we have, Mr. Joe? So I suppose we do not have any more questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, sir.
Okay,
No,
Mr. Tauwfiq. Yes. Okay, Mr. Tauwfiq.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your words.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks
the session. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Pleasure to be here. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So Mitil sir, if we have your kind permission, can we go ahead and start the last session of this forensic workshop?
Hi Bharat bhai, would you like to
Jyot
discuss
sir,
anything?
आपको कैमरा ऑन करिए.
Hi, all well.
Jyot sir.
Good evening, sir. How are you, sir?
All well, all well. So I'm ready to start whenever you all are ready. You can.
Yes,
Am
sir.
I?
PPT है sir.
हाँ, sir. PPT. How do I share the
Bharat
screen?
sir, आपको
Good evening, Mitil
Jyot sir
sir.
start करिए. Jyot sir start करिए.
Quickly introduce our session chairman and the speaker for this session to our participants. So, CA Mitil Chokshi is the session chairman with us. I'm very honored and privileged to be introducing a personality and a professional like Mitil sir. He's one of the youngest chairman of WIRC of ICAI in the year 2003-4. He has completed doctorate in making Mumbai a global financial center from the Mumbai University. He is on the board of several companies in India as a director. He's a senior partner at Chokshi & Chokshi LLP Chartered Accountant since last 20 years. He specializes in banking and non-banking financial services sector. He's presented papers in Mauritius, UK, Canada, South Africa, and many other countries. He's conducted training sessions in South Africa. He is an external auditor to the financial regulators of the government of Mauritius. He is a professional member and has affiliations with various bodies and organizations, co-author to many of the books and publications. He's recently presented a webinar on the topic Insights in Forensic Investigation and Monitoring for Banks. And if we had the liberty of time, we could as well take introduction of Mitil sir throughout the whole session. But that stalwart of a personality and professional we have as session chairman with us today. Let us all welcome Mitil sir on the platform. Thank you, sir, for joining and agreeing to share your words of wisdom on this session.
Thank you, Jyot Bakshi. You have been very forceful in terms of your activity for the WIRC, and we are very much thankful for the way you have been conducting the entire course and the way you have been following up, and the detailing that you have been doing, and that is the detailing that a forensic requires, and which is what you have been doing it so much in the last 1 month or so. Good to have you, Bharat bhai, the young and dynamic speaker on forensic accounting and fraud investigation. So, we'll be very happy to learn from Bharat bhai about forensic accounting and fraud investigations. So, coming back to our topic, and
sir, just liberty. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Audible, sir. Sir, I'll just introduce Bharat bhai to the audience.
Yeah, please do so, and then I can, give some opening remarks, and then Bharat bhai can, then we can learn from Bharat bhai.
Correct. So we have with us here Bharat Jeswani, speaker for today's session in this workshop. He's a chartered accountant and a member of the institute since September 2011. He's a certified fraud examiner. He's completed the certificate course on forensic audit and fraud investigation of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He has 10 plus years of experience in forensic accounting, fraud investigation, due diligence, internal audits, fraud risk management and assessment engagements. He's worked with income tax department, assisting in search operations and special audits. He's been a consultant to Directorate of Revenue Intelligence. He's completed more than 40 forensic audits, including overseas assignments in Australia and in the United States of America. We welcome CA Bharat Jeswani to this session, and we thank on behalf of WIRC for agreeing to share his knowledge on the topic with us today. Welcome, Bharat bhai.
Thank you so much.
And over to you to take forward the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Jyot bhai. Thank you, Bharat bhai. Bharat bhai, we are really eagerly awaiting your presentation. So, I'll just share a couple of examples, and what has happened today, what has happened in our profession today in terms of forensic. I mean, 5 years ago, we used to talk to our chartered accountants in the office, and we would say what area of work you would like to specialize in. When 5 years ago, they would turn around and say, we want to get into international taxation. Last year, when we did our interviews in our office, our HR did their interviews, everybody said, I want to get into forensic. So it's like, it's become such a glamour quotient now, the forensic audits and investigation. But having said so today, what has happened is that whilst, yes, there is a lot of glamour, lot of responsibility, lot of credibility is at stake. Entire credibility of the profession is at stake. The responsibility of us as professionals is at stake. And today, there are question marks which are coming up as to, are the forensic auditors as good as the so-called multinational firms? Are the forensic auditors as extraordinary as the multinational firms, or are they, not so extraordinary? Do they have the technology? Do they have the super technology? Do they have advanced skills? This is the question that comes up. And yes, whilst we as practicing professionals are looking more and more to advance our department of forensic auditing, forensic investigation, we also face the issue of attrition. We also face the issue of staff moving out, and therefore we have to keep on training our teams. And therefore these are the challenges. This is the backdrop within which we have to run our forensic practice. The fundamental question that is asked to me is, if I start my forensic practice, it's a chicken and egg. How do I start without expertise, and how do I get work without expertise? So the classic example that I always give is, at any point in time, we need to have our capsule knowledge of the sectors ready. And whenever we have a potential pitch for a forensic assignment, pitch as in, whenever we are invited for a quotation, whenever we are invited for a tender, and whenever we have to make a technical presentation, we use our capsule presentation of that industry and try to present our skill sets. Based on the skill sets, try to elevate ourselves to get the assignment. So the first part is to get the assignment. First thing we have to do is try and get it. That time we have to only focus on getting the assignment. It's like our India-Pakistan match. The Pakistani bowlers first 5 overs, they only focused on getting the big wicket. They did not think of winning. They only focused on getting the big. So it's the same way. And we have to learn from everybody, right? As professionals, whether it's India, Pakistan, we have to learn from everybody. So and we have to learn from our mistakes. So therefore, what we have to do is build our capsule presentations, focus on getting the mandate. Once we get ourselves into the mandate, then we will worry about execution. Then the question is, and unlike several other fraternities, our CA fraternity is so good that if I call up Bharat, Jeswani, if I call up Jeswani, and I will say, boss, mujhe help chahiye forensic mein, they are willing to immediately help. And nobody, our profession men, all seniors, juniors, everybody is willing to help each other, and they won't even, professional to professional, CA to CA, they won't even demand fees. They'll say, sir, आपको जो fee देना है देना, client को जो fee मिलेगा, फिर हम लोग we'll do a win-win and we'll share it. Having said so, therefore, what we need to do is, we need to associate, network with our professional brothers and sisters for the purpose of execution of the assignment. One part is getting it, then is the execution. So then when having done all of this, then the question arises that what were the challenges that we faced in the assignments? What were the challenges that we faced in the assignments, right? Digital forensics. One of the assignments last year, we did one very famous case of one of the actors for the NCB. You might have read our names, and we did for the NCB for a famous late actor, and we had to do the entire money trail. And the question came, how do we decode the WhatsApps? So and I give this example. What did we do? We first of all, we took a database of all the WhatsApps. We converted all the WhatsApps into Excel. Then we did a VLOOKUP and we did a sort filter by keywords. What were the keywords? Mawa, Pan, Padika. In Baroda, we are used to Pan ka galle. We are used to Padika. We are used to Mawa. Some of these words were there, right? They were saying seven Mawas. And we correlated those with a VLOOKUP into the bank statements. And we said, oh, 7 lakhs was taken or given, which means there was some kgs of drugs which were exchanged for 7 lakhs. That becomes my entire money trail, decoding of my money trail. And then, this is all. And therefore, we went into, then obviously, we went into certain, then we used some technology tools and we went into digital, forensics. Like one is identifying what are the common words, what are outliers, what are abnormalities, what are giving me significant spikes or downwards. From that, we did a deep dive investigation. So just to give you a perspective, One is getting the assignment, then is execution with technology, correct? And therefore, we as a firm are very passionate about us being made in India. We've always claimed we are made in India. And when we got one of the pioneering forensic assignments, from the multinationals way back when, in the Jignesh Shah matter, which you all know, NSCL matter, we were one of the, firms who had got that. And, we went all out and we spent more money in doing the assignment than actually the revenues. Because we said, nobody's going to remember whether it's an X firm or a Y firm, but they're going to say, was it an Indian firm or an MNC firm? And the question came before us, did the Indian firm do a great job? Like Bharat Bhai, our dynamic speaker, he goes to Australia, US and does work. Nobody asks about Bharat Jeswani. They ask about this Indian gentleman, professional, was top class. What are the key words they remember? Indian and top class. Correct. They don't remember it is Bharat Jeswani. They don't remember it is Jyot Bakshi. They don't remember it is Mitil Chokshi, but they remember India. So then they compare. Was the Indian good, or was the local Australian good, or was the British good? And when we do international assignments in forensic, they remember the Indian guys are outstanding. Recently I was there in Mauritius, and one of the questions that came before us, and was another Indian firm who had been engaged. And they asked us, and they said, this firm was engaged. I said, they are outstanding. You have engaged the right firm. One of the other firm forensic investigator was engaged there globally. Now, again, what did they remember? It was an Indian firm. They said, first we approached British firm, then we approached South African, and finally we settled down for Indians. And also the best part was the Indians were value for money. I said, boss, Indians so value for money rehta hi hai. But the question is, did you derive the best quality? And they said 100%. The board said 100%. And therefore, what we are doing for ourselves is also what we are doing for our nation, and building our brand as a chartered accountant, building our brand as a professional, and building our and that can only happen if we are passionate about it, right? So therefore, coming back to the fundamental issue, when we pitch for an assignment, when we execute it, we have to have the passion to perform the best. Number one. Number two, use the best technology. Number three, use whatever our connectivity networks is there of getting the expertise, learning from each other, and trying to deliver the best quality, and at the same time maintain credibility of our profession. Having said so, yes, there are empanelments. We need to continue to keep on lookout for the empanelments where we need to be empaneled as forensic auditors, and we should not go for underpricing, because the moment we go for underpricing and underquoting, it amounts to degradation of the entire profession. And therefore, please let us try to elevate our status rather than degrading our status in doing the forensic assignment. We have to keep in mind that the forensic investigation has to follow the three-step approach of the current macros, VLOOKUPs, outliers, transformation into automation using of the ideas and the tools of the world. We also build applications in our office. We have a training company where we build applications, IT applications, where we build, we transform small processes into macros, and from macros we convert them into applications, and then we integrate the application. We must always look at building applications, because we are a technology. All of us are now, embraced with technology, and that will lead to AI. AI is not going to happen overnight. We want that, from our 20 questions that we raise, there should be 2,000 questions the computer should raise on us. And that is what will be the AI. Okay. There are report writing applications which are available today. There are appeal drafting applications available in the US, IBM, Watson, and others, as you would be aware of. We have to embrace technology also in our entire journey of forensic. So this is the whole top-down approach towards forensic, getting the assignment to execution, to using technology, to getting into the deliverables that we are desired and required in terms of the money trail. I think I just wanted to, my role as a chairman is to just give a backdrop. Within this backdrop, now Bharat Bhai will take us through the entire learning process, and I'm there with all of you to learn from Bharat Bhai and Jyot Bakshi. So over to you, Bharat Bhai. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Jyot, is my presentation also visible?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, okay. And I think I should just start. Uh, First of all, thank you so much, sir, for your insights. Very useful. And I haven't met you personally, but I've met Hardik. Hardik sir works with you, and it is a pleasure to actually you be the chairman for my session. And Okay, so I'll just dive in. So my session is mostly going to be about the opportunities and the types of assignments that we'll be doing, that we do, opportunities available to members. What kind of problems do we have in getting those assignments? All of that. So I'll be talking about that basically on the business side of the. So my presentation is basically it is just pointers which I'll be elaborating upon. So they are just my pointers which I'll be elaborating upon. So that's how it is going to go. So let me just start with the first. Just a I think this is just a second. I think I cannot see my own presentation. Yes. Yeah, so we'll be starting with integrity, ethics, and culture. So this is basically we are going to talk about fraud risk management, which is a very unexplored area, which I think most of the chartered accountants or forensic accountants are contacted only when the fraud has already happened. Only after the company or any organization has suffered a loss, only after that do they invite forensic accountants to look into it. But very few organizations are actually proactive about fraud, who are trying to prevent it rather than suffer losses and investigate it. So very few organizations are proactive, and that is a very big problem. Because see, what happens is कि एक बार fraud हो गया, उसके बाद when we do investigate, we can investigate, we can find evidence also, but actually recovering the money that has been lost due to fraud, it is not a very easy process. The person might have already spent the money somewhere, and then we'll have to do the tracing of his assets. He might have moved it somewhere, तो उसका asset tracing करना पड़ता है. Other than that, we might have to go get into litigation, court case रहेगा, and we do know how long it takes to actually resolve cases in our country or in any country for that matter. So it is a very long process to say when we are actually trying to recover the money. So prevention, as the old quote goes, prevention is better than cure, but it is very hard to explain that to organizations that they should focus on prevention. But that is the right way to go. So fraud risk management is service is a type of service where the organization hires professionals like us, forensic accountants, fraud examiners, who would be studying the overall processes, procedures of the organization, understand where do we have leakages, and then filling up those leakages. Wherever there is chances of fraud, just first identify all the areas that are high risk, and then based on your analysis, then you figure people. Uh, it is completely dependent on everybody who was earlier hired by them, and the same people are running the business. So they have no clue how it is being done, and suddenly the losses, even the turnover did not change. Turnover was still the same, rather it was growing, but the business was experiencing too much losses. And then when I looked into their books, the site expenses were just extravagant. It was not expected. It was totally unacceptable amount of spending which we saw in their books. So this is this. Then we, of course, then we did all the procedures of fraud. I explained to him that we should, have a fraud risk management system in our because you are losing about all your money just because of frauds. All these people are able to take away your money just because you do not have a proper type of system or proper type of controls to manage all this. So after that, we defined did the risk assessment, defined their systems, and trained their staff. And after that, obviously, slowly the losses reduced, and then they were back to their actual profits. But we could not recover the money which was lost, which is my point here. That organizations, once they lose money due to fraud, it is really hard to recover it back, and that is what happened in that case. So recovery is really difficult, but it is very hard to actually convince the organizations proactively. For example, see, in this case, what happened was though he was losing a lot of money, so he understood that my organization is losing a lot of money, and he wanted to know why all this was happening. So when we came in touch, he was already hurting, already wounded. Uske baad, it was not a very difficult task to explain to him, and then deliver the assignment. It was not very difficult. But when you go to a healthy organization, healthy in the sense, they are not aware. Fraud to hota hai. Most of the organizations are suffering from occupational fraud, but they are not aware of it. So when you go to a very healthy organization, you talk about occupational fraud, internal fraud, or fraud due to vendors or other contractors. So they would say कि नहीं हमारे यहाँ नहीं होता है. It would happen in every other organization, but I'm sure it will not happen in mine. So this is what is the attitude of most of the organizations, managements. This is how they look into it. So I do also remember that around 5 years back, I had communicated this to a company in Mumbai. They're doing a turnover of about 200-300 crores. So I had told him that you should have a proper internal control system, a fraud risk management system, because even though we have this compliance in our statutory audit, but the auditor is not actually looking into the internal control systems and commenting on that. It is just a formality. They don't actually do it. In my experience, of course, many auditors would be doing it. But in my experience, I've seen many auditors don't do it also. So I had communicated that your organization should have a proper formal fraud risk management system, because you are doing a huge turnover, there are huge volumes, and the transaction is very branched out. All the transactions, it is not centralized. Also, you have many organized branches, you have many offices, and you need a fraud risk management system. So the client did not accept. He just ignored it and laughed at it rather. And now in this current year, I'm actually investigating about 80 crores of fraud, which they are suspecting. And we are at a very conclusive stage where we have actually proved the fraud also, but I don't think it will be recovered anytime soon. It could go up to 10 years. So that is how it goes. It is was very hard to convince organizations. When we want to talk about the loss, that is how I normally, that is how I communicate. Anytime, even if a small fraud is discovered, it is very important for them to punish whoever the employee is, whoever would have committed the fraud, and to make an example out of it. So that that it is very important when you have that kind of atmosphere, wherein even if you are found taking just like 500 rupees of a company's assets, but it is with the intention of stealing or defrauding, in that case, you will be strictly dealt with. When you have such kind of attitude, such kind of atmosphere, so that prevents the fraud way too in a very big way. That it really helps. Okay. So now I'll get to basically the procedures. How do we actually do it? First is the risk assessment process. Risk assessment process, we just look into all the procedures that the organization is following, with the intent to figure out where there is possibility of fraud, wherever there are leakages, something that can be that can lead to fraud. So that is a very specific targeted process where we are trying to find out what kind of frauds are possible. So risk assessment involves 2-3 different type of procedures. One is just looking for leakages. Wherever there could be leakages, according to us, we are trying to find out where those leakages would be. Another is a very targeted approach based on the type of frauds that are very common in that industry, and we know how they are done. So we are trying to figure out if there are red flags. That is also a type of risk assessment. So it's a comprehensive process. We do both the types of risk assessment and try to figure out where exactly the frauds are possible. For example, if there is a sales guy, okay, if the sales guy he has the power to determine the sales price. The sales price is not fixed. It is a volatile product. The product is the pricing is very dynamic, and the salesperson has the power to define the price of the product. And whenever he's dealing with clients, so he has the power to change the price based on his convenience, like that. In that case, plus the company accepts the payments in cash. So there is a very high probability that he would something he has sold for say 10,000 rupees. He would inform the company that he has sold for 7,000 rupees and take 3,000 rupees in cash, which he has gotten. So this is the type of specific type of fraud which we identify in the risk assessment process, and we know that this could happen, very well happen in this organization, and then we figure out a way to plug it. So when first we do the risk assessment, we create a list of frauds, the type of fraud schemes that are possible in the organization, and based on, again, we create a risk profile for all the types of frauds which are most likely, again, and which could cause the most damage. Based on that, we create a high priority frauds that we need to focus on, and then we define procedures and policies and systems to plug all these types of fraud schemes that we have figured out. For example, in this case, as I just told you, like the sales guy has the power to determine the sales price, and also he can collect in cash. If we just fix the price, and then whatever, even if we collect in cash, doesn't matter, because we have we can always match up the stock, and then we can check he has to sell it at a fixed price only. If you have to sell it at 10,000, you sell it 10,000 only. So whenever if the stock is lower by 5 units, he should have 50,000 rupees cash or in our bank account, whichever way. So these are the type of procedures, controls, and systems that we will incorporate, and this is how it works. After the risk assessment, we create a fraud universe, and then we define controls to plug all these things. So after that, when we have defined the controls, it is very important to train and communicate this to the employees, because if there is a change in the systems, and they have a way of operating in the same way as they have been doing for years, so it becomes a little difficult for them to change. So there is always a resistance to change, but it is very important that change should, because the whole exercise will become futile if we do not achieve actual change in the policies and procedures. So it is very important to first communicate to them that things are changing and it is for the betterment of the organization, and then to train them exactly what kind of reporting systems are going to be followed, what kind of procedures they have to do. All this has to be trained, and then we have to keep monitoring that for some time, so that they become acquainted, and it becomes a habit for them. So that is very important to actually achieve a proper system, fraud risk management system. Also, during the fraud risk management system, it is very important to have a whistleblower policy. We all know, I'm sure we all know who a whistleblower is. We do hear a lot about whistleblowers. We do read it a lot in the newspapers. So whistleblower is a person who basically reports a fraud. If he came across something, reports about the fraud. So it's very important to have a proper whistleblower policy. The reason being because, as per again the survey I was talking about, the report to the nation, almost 45 to 50% of frauds are reported due to tips. You get to know about them because somebody gave a tip, basically. So it is very important to have a proper whistleblower policy in place. And so what does a whistleblower policy have? It talks about how are you supposed to report the fraud, and it is we also have to ensure that people don't misuse that, because in one of the organizations we had created a whistleblower hotline and a whistleblower policy, but we had not clearly defined the protocols, procedures for reporting of fraud. So any of the employees would just pick up, and there were many prank calls. Unless we then came up with protocols and explained to them that if any of these prank calls continue, then there would be some consequences for those employees. So that was how it was. So we need to have a proper protocol. We need to have a proper whistleblower policy. Also, we can have a whistleblower hotline, which is, again, it can be in the house, it can be outsourced also. Many organizations prefer outsourced whistleblower hotline because employees are more comfortable to share with an independent entity. So that is also, again, just providing the whistleblower policy and whistleblower hotline is another area of practice, which is very common outside India. The Indian organizations are slowly becoming aware of these practices, and so even the fraud risk management process, all these things are coming up. So that is one. Again, this next is a special internal audit. So internal audit has been about assurance always, and it is just about for the management that the books of accounts show a true and fair view, and it is all the compliances have been done on time, and they have been correctly managed. So that has been what internal audit is. Slowly it has evolved a little. Now data has been used to understand the business processes and improve those processes, improve the efficiency of the business. So that has it has diverted a little from assurance, and some other things have been added. But assurance has always been the core of an internal audit. And I think that assurance, the reasonable assurance that internal audit provides, can always be expanded. And that is what, when I talk of a special internal audit, it is the term is vague, but we have been providing this service to some organizations. When you're talking about special, it is very targeted to occupational fraud. As I said, based on the report to the nations, organizations are losing almost 5% of their revenues due to occupational fraud itself. So the internal audit that we are doing is very focused on fraud. So that not just the compliance, not just the accuracy of books, it is very focused that there should not be any kind of fraud. And our audit procedures are targeted to detect any kind of fraud in the early going itself. So that is what a special audit does. Fraud analytics, again, is a type of risk management process, but it is only useful for big organizations, very high turnover, very high volume organizations. We had some time back, we were in talks with an organization in Dubai who is a very popular grocery store. You should not call it a grocery store, but basically that is it is like a big chain of grocery stores, and they were looking for some organization that would provide fraud analytics. So it is a very they are doing about crores of rupees of transaction on a daily basis, and the number of transactions also run in lakhs. So it is what they are looking for, a very robust kind of system. So of course you need a good IT partner for you to provide that kind of service. We are not equipped with all the IT that is required for the analytics. So I think this was the major big chunk. I will get into the next leg of my presentation, which is whistleblower investigation. We just spoke about who whistleblowers are. So we discussed how we need to have a strong whistleblower policy that explains, how to report fraud and who the whistleblower is, how he's supposed to report fraud. So this is the next step. After a whistleblower actually calls up at a whistleblower hotline or in some other way reports fraud, that is the next step, is the whistleblower investigation, which is very common. This is quite common in organizations wherein we have to, sorry, it's very quite common. Whistleblower investigations are quite common even in India also, wherein we are wherein organizations where fraud is reported, they do contact forensic accountants or investigators to look into deep dive into the investigation and come up with a report wherein find evidence and come up with a report explaining what actually went through. So whenever you get a call for a whistleblower investigation, it is very important to first, understand as to is it actually an offense? It has actually the fraud has happened or not. First, you have to predict something, because see, as I told you, there was in an organization there were many prank calls. That is one problem. Sometimes it also happens that the people are they are not quite well aware or educated about the purpose of having a whistleblower policy or whistleblower hotline. So they would report anything on a whistleblower hotline, which has got nothing to do with fraud, which is not a serious thing also, and which is very subjective sometimes. So we need to have a proper judgment before starting any investigation as to whether this requires an investigation or not. So that is something very important for before starting an investigation. When we do start the investigation, it is very important to maintain the confidentiality throughout the process. Because what happens is when we are investigating, and then for that investigation we need to get into some hard drives, get some employee laptops, maybe their phones also sometimes, and we have to interview so many people for the investigation. So what happens is when it creates a very negative atmosphere, and people are not comfortable with your work also. He would try to just erase the evidence or try to figure out something in that case. So that is a very that is another big problem. So we need to keep it very hush. We need to keep it very subtle, and that. So after the investigation is completed, we need to present a report to the stakeholders, the management basically. One thing which is very common in whistleblower investigation is these are basically internal frauds which are being reported by the employees. Mostly, most of the cases, whistleblower cases, it is the employee who reports the fraud, who gives the tip, but it is not always so. One of our cases, a vendor had reported as a whistleblower regarding a kickback scheme which one of the employees had offered him, but then he happened to be close to the management, which the employee was not aware, so he had contacted. So most of the cases it is the employees who would be reporting, but there are sometimes it happens that a vendor or maybe a customer would be reporting such type of frauds. So, but almost all the investigations are done for the purpose of the management. So the management would want to collect evidence, and the main purpose of the management is because they want to decide as to what has to be done with the employee. They would want to fire that employee or maybe take some action, or even if they could also consider legal action. But in my experience, whenever I've done whistleblower investigation, they've always come up. They have, the intention has always been that, okay, if there is fraud, just investigate it, collect the evidence, just whatever. If we are convinced, if we are convinced that yes, the fraud has happened, you can explain to us how it was done, so that would be sufficient for us. But even though we do know that it might not be going to court, the whole case might not be going to court, but still we should always conduct the investigation assuming that we will be going to court. That is how our every investigation should be, assuming that we should be going to court. And whenever the whistleblower investigation is complete, as I discussed in the previous slides, we need to have a zero tolerance policy. We need to have make an example out of this. There was a case wherein a company was suspecting internal fraud, and they had just recently their next generation had taken over. And when the next generation came in and they just updated all the systems, all the procedures, they automated everything, and they used a lot of technology to digitalize everything. So they came across many issues with there were various stock mismatches, data mismatches. There was such. So the new management decided that we need to create an example out of this. We are not going to just let this go. Even though when we started the investigation, we told them that whatever losses that you have met, whatever you have lost in this scenario, it is better to just out of court deal with the employees, settle with them, so that you can recover most of your money. Because if you go in a court, it is a long lost battle. Maybe when you actually recover the money, it would not make that much sense. But they wanted to make an example out of it, that no, we want to show that we are not tolerant of this. So that should be done after every investigation. Wherever if it is successfully proven, it should be, you should create an example out of it, and that is very important. Okay, so as I said, wherever even if the company is not going to go for litigation, and we are well aware of that the company might not go for litigation, still our every investigation should be in the form that it will end up in litigation. We should assume that it will end up in litigation, and that is the way we should be conducting all our investigation. That is the way, that is how much we should be prepared. The evidence that we are collecting, the chain of custody that we are maintaining, it should be based on the highest standards of the court of law. It should be acceptable in a court of law, even though we know that it would be, even if we do not collect all the evidence is sufficient to prove fraud, and the management would be convinced and they would take action just based on the limited evidence. But we should always, whenever we are taking up such an assignment, we should always look into considering that yes, we have to come up with the complete process, and it should be with in mind that we need to end it with in the court. Okay, whistleblower protection is very important, because that is how otherwise it will not work. Most of the whistleblowers are really scared that their name will come up, and some management, strong influential management people would take some kind of action against them. May not be direct, indirect. So whenever you're doing a whistleblower investigation, you have to make sure that their identity is protected, or even if their identity gets disclosed, they are compensated and protected in future. Okay, so this is again the second leg, and I think we are on time. So I'll go to the next other two areas that I need to discuss. Investigation to support regulatory authorities. So these are the most common. That is, as we read in the newspapers and as we hear, the most common type of investigations are the ones that those are conducted by regulators. And of course, Chokshi sir here is the most experienced amongst us, who has taken so many cases and all high-profile cases and whatnot. So he is quite well aware of all these type of assignments. So I'll just briefly discuss, some few type of assignments which I have dealt with or I'm aware of. So serious fraud investigation office is where is one that deals with the company frauds, basically frauds done by the company which it has defrauded its shareholders or defrauded customers, or fraud committed by directors of the company. So SFIO deals with such frauds. Firms can impanel themselves with SFIO, and they get assignments to investigate. Most of the regulatory assignments that we get are based on empanelment. It is, in my experience, they are always looking for really senior firms with a lot of expertise. And so what happens here is, young chartered accountants or those people who are qualified, they also have the experience, but they sometimes do not have the legacy that senior firms have. But that practically in real life, that is what happens. These organizations, regulatory authorities are looking for senior firms with all the technical support and big manpower. So this in almost all the types of assignment that we'll be discussing here, that is a very common factor, which that all of them will come through empanelment, and they are looking for senior firms and people who have all the technology and IT support. This is what I understand. SEBI also hires chartered accountants. They panel chartered accountants, mostly for cases of insider trading or circuit trading. That is what I'm aware of. There are mostly related to listed companies, public listed companies, when they commit frauds, when they defraud their shareholders, in that case. Special audits by income tax, we have heard of that. When again, it is empaneled, the firm empanelment is there. Special audits when the income tax department suspects that more investigation needs to be done. There is some evasion of tax, some non-disclosure of income. So in that case, we have special audits of income tax. In all these, regulatory assignments, they have a very clear, definite goal. It is very, very focused and very targeted. They expect a specific type of report from the service provider. They have fixed fees for the different type of assignments. So one thing that I find in these regulatory assignments is that they are very structured, very clearly structured, very properly structured, and very fixed fees also. There's another problem also that I have seen in these assignments is that because they are sometimes, they involve some influential people, sometimes they involve politicians or celebrities. So then there is a in real life, there is a very big possibility that, you would get threat calls, maybe sometimes bribes are offered. So that is what happens in the actual scenario, which is quite obvious also. I'll discuss tax fraud analytics a little after a few minutes. Money laundering investigations for ED. ED does money laundering investigation. So, for example, if you have been hired by Enforcement Directorate to look into a money laundering investigation, so obviously, see, the person you are investigating probably has laundered about 50-100 crores of rupees or more than that. and with your skills and with your tools, you are actually going to figure it out, and you are going to prove it. You are going to submit the report, and that report is going to be like a conclusive evidence that this money was laundered. Now, what happens to that person who has laundered the money? So it goes into the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and it has a rigorous imprisonment for, I think, 6-7 years, something like that. So that person who is rich and influential would obviously do anything in his power to stop you from, proving his fraud. So that is what is real. So obviously he might threaten you, or he might offer you some kind of a bribe. So this is very common in these kind of investigations. Another thing which is very common is that most of these investigations are very high risk. So when you are working in these type of investigations, you have very little leg room to make any kind of mistakes. So it is any kind of mistake that you do that could have very high impact on the final result of the case. So it is very, very, very important that the cases are to be handled in very delicately and very only expert. If you have expert knowledge, if you have advanced skills, if you have understanding of the technology and the tools that are available in the market, because all organization like enforcement director would use the best tools available in the country or in the world probably. So you need to be aware of all that, and only then can you actually provide these kind of services. Then there is narcotics, as just sir also mentioned. They have last investigated a case, and they do more for narcotics. Diversion of funds by those borrowers, very common. That was, I think, synonymous with forensic audit in the beginning, wherein the NPA, which is a very big problem, obviously, with in our country, in the whole world, in our country especially, the bank frauds. So, which is in most of the cases, it is just the diversion of funds, that people are just taking the money from the bank, then rotating it through different countries to different entities, and then finally ending in a black window, wherein the money has been invested in their personal assets. And so that is a very common kind of assignment that forensic audit, you have to get empaneled with the IBA, Indian Banking Association, and then you get these type of assignments. Also, it is not in the presentation, but the bankruptcy court, IBC, the resolution professional, even they are hiring forensic accountants to look into any kind of misappropriation or diversion of funds. As I said that I would be talking about fraud analytics. So that is again a very new field, wherein I think we have been researching on it. So we believe that the intelligence system of the income tax department or the GST department is extremely average, and they are not able to actually trace those people who are evading tax. And that's the fraud the analytic system of the intelligence system of the tax needs a complete overhaul. So that is another field that can be explored. It is not investigation per se for the regulators, but it is very it can be a very value-added service which can be provided to the regulators. Okay, so this is now I'm at the final leg of my presentation, which is litigation support services. So in the layman word, it is like when there is a litigation going on, some kind of a case is going on. So to support that case, what would be our role as forensic accountants? What we are supposed to do is that we are supposed to find the facts, collect evidence for those facts, and by finding the evidence, collecting that evidence, presenting that evidence, the dispute can be resolved very easily. So
Hello,
that
Bharat
is
sir.
one area, a very
Hello.
yes, yes, yes,
सर
yes, sir.
आपका
Tell me.
नेटवर्क स्लो है सर. सर आपका
Okay.
नेटवर्क
आवाज नहीं आ रही.
में रुका हुआ है सर.
एक second. I think I will just turn off my webcam.
सर.
Hello.
सर आपका स्लाइड चेंज करिए ना सर एक बार.
Just a second.
2 सेकंड में
एक
वापस
second.
आपको देता हूँ. हाँ वापस आपको दिया ऑप्शन. शो माय स्क्रीन करिए. स्लाइड शो करिए सर.
हाँ. अभी लिटिगेशन सपोर्ट सर्विसेज पे है.
हाँ सर. हाँ सर.
यस यस दिख रहा है.
बस
यस
ये लास्ट स्लाइड है.
ओके सर.
सो आवाज आ रही है मेरी क्लियरली?
आवाज आ रही है.
यस भरत भाई आ रही है.
Okay. So this is my final slide. So I'll just continue. When we are talking about I'm talking about financial disputes. Financial disputes is a very, very extremely vast field, which is, I think it is slowly being explored, because whenever there is a financial dispute, mostly people are hiring lawyers, but then the lawyers are hiring forensic accountants, because it has been found that when you are hiring forensic accountants, they are able to investigate, they are able to find the evidence, present the evidence perfectly well, and then what happens is that the cases get resolved very quickly. So isliye, for that reason, financial disputes is a very, very lucrative field, wherein you any type of cases, all type of cases can come in as far as financial disputes are concerned, and there is no limit to the type of cases. See, I have attended family dispute cases wherein they are negotiating on how do you have to divide their property, and they are arguing that this belongs to me, this belongs to me, but based on all the documents and evidence that they have, I could explain to them, see, this is what the documentary evidence says, this belongs to you, this has been given to you, this has been earned by you, this is how the money has flown in. So based on this is how it is going to end up in a court. So that when they understood that it is as simple as what is going to happen, and we can already predict what is going to happen just based on the evidence or data available. So all these things, there are all types of disputes. We've even been hired by an individual to defend himself. So it was a very interesting case. There are cement companies, right? So cement companies, they have their agencies. So what that some officers of that cement company did, they misappropriated a lot of stock. They sold about 1 crore or something of stock in cash. They collected the cash, and what they did, they just manipulated the software and billed all of that to one of their agencies. So this is how they manipulated the whole process. So now I was contacted by the agency who was being accused of fraud to defend him. So I had to collect evidence as to prove that this person has not committed fraud. It was the officers who had actually committed the fraud. So all these types of cases that come up. Other than that, also when there's a case is going on in court, some high corporate case is going on in court, so the court can hire you to investigate or to look into the evidence or to comment on the evidence. So that can be done, or one of the parties can hire you to investigate and present the evidence. So You can be a fact witness. Fact witness is the person who just, who has seen the evidence, who has been there, and he is giving his just narrating whatever he has seen or whatever he has heard. So that is a fact witness. Then there is an expert witness, which like being a forensic accountant or having some specialized skills. We are being hired to look into the investigation and comment on it at the end, that okay, this all after our investigation, based on investigation, and based on our expertise, we can comment that this fraud has happened or not happened, or this is what happened, this is the truth. So these are different areas of work which we can do whenever you are into getting into if the court has hired you or a client has hired you, where you have to be a expert witness or a fact witness. You have to be very careful about all the protocols and procedures of the court, which you have to have thorough knowledge of that, because the liability is very high in these cases, wherein if you if you come up with something, give some information based on your opinion without actual investigation and without proper evidence, that can lead to some actual financial liabilities on yourself. So that has to be taken care of. I think this is all. I think this is all for me. And yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for listening.
Thank you, Bharat bhai. I think that was outstanding. The amount of learning and value add that you have provided is outstanding. And to take up from your last point, we had done an investigation of an IPL team valuation, and one of the teams insisted for a cross-examination of me, and I was cross-examined for 8 hours, taking your perspective. And I had a lawyer with me also. I'm not a lawyer, and I had a lawyer with me, and they go into such procedural defects, as you rightly pointed out, Bharat bhai. They go into such procedural defects. Your engagement letter, the comma, the signature. Oh, your engagement letter doesn't capture this scope of work. Then why you are doing it? They go into such nitty-gritties, and therefore our documentation has to be so skillful. And I think it's a very good point, Bharat bhai, that you have brought out. In our forensic practice. Besides, of course, you started off with the entire risk management, which was essentially outstanding also. So, just to quickly add on to what Bharat bhai said, and then we leave it to the organizers, and then we leave the floor to the questions. Or Mr. Bakshi, what is the procedure? You want to leave the floor to the questions, and then we give the concluding remarks, or how do you want to do it?
Sir, there are a couple of questions already floated on the screen. If we can just see, sir, the way you want to take it, there is no such protocol.
So I think let's have the difficult part, that is answering the questions being done by Bharat bhai, and then I can give some concluding remarks. Correct? So why don't you? One of the question which has come up, Bharat bhai, is: should an auditor, if called upon, address the staff of target company after investigation is over? Very often, the auditor is asked to address the residual staff to instill confidence in them. The auditor is asked to address the residual staff to instill confidence in them. So
I think what he is trying to say is that after we have concluded a whistleblower investigation, and maybe somebody has been fired, or the auditor should come and talk to the residual staff. I think it is either way. I mean, if it is very. I was talking about zero tolerance and making an example. So it is very important to do that. But after that, of course, we should come to, and we should have a conversation with those the other staff. Because see, what happens is the honest people, so people who are very honest, who are working very honestly, they are always very concerned that because they don't understand such complex things. So they are also concerned what if we don't do anything, but somehow we get caught due to some technical error or maybe. So it is always good to install that confidence that only if there is some actual misgivings, only then will you be caught, and you will get an opportunity to be heard. and there is no problem as such. So yes, we should actually communicate with them even after the investigation is done.
Fantastic.
I think that answers right, sir.
Yeah, perfect. Now the second question: should the auditor be indemnified by the company? Alas, if they would, and in case of investigation involving sensitive issues, should protection be afforded?
As an auditor, I think they should always, because sir, we have to deal with so many kind of threat calls. It has been I've created another identity also for myself, just to take care of these covert investigations. I have a few identities so that I don't get these type of calls from people and all. But I think that is a part of our profession. And when we take up assignments, it is already included in our fees. I think we should ourselves include in our fees, because what would they be indemnifying us at afterwards, which we in such case also. But yeah, even in the letter of engagement, the engagement that we sign, we do have a disclaimer wherein we need to be indemnified against any kind of future legal course of action or any kind of such thing. So we do have it. It should be there in our letter of engagement. I think that also is an okay answer.
Yeah. So can I just add a comment here, Bharat bhai? One is, yes, so the engagement letter needs to carry the indemnification. Now the question is how much that can be actually put in practice is the question. Because, as you know, in India, for indemnification, if I have to go against the, team charging against me, then I have to, and also claiming indemnification. Sometimes I may also have to, typically, we go to a doctor when we have a problem, right? 2 saal ke baad, we are forgotten. Forensic is over, we are forgotten. Apna kaam nahi hai, matlab khatam ho gaya. The professional is not required. And after 2 years, the clients forget the value of the indemnity which they have provided. So in which event, we sometimes have to go against the indemnifier that, Baba, please, we are invoking our indemnity and please provide us a protection, or please provide reimbursement of the costs, because for us the legal cost is the main issue. So that is one aspect which I think to take up with ICI, and I think Mr. Bakshi, you can take it up with the ICI and Baroda chapter, and all of you can take it up, that how forensic auditors can have some kind of a financial indemnification from the authorities. I think we must take that up with the ICI, as a profession. So I think this is a very good take-home point which we have got from the discussion and the question, and whoever has raised this question is outstanding. So I think we must give full marks to that this question was raised so that we can raise the issue. The idea of this forum is to raise such issues to the ICI. And of course, we also had some experiences of some investigations in some remote areas, in Naxal areas and all those Naxalite areas and all those certain kind of areas, and it was actually very, very scary. So one of the investigations, one of our teams went to Afghanistan. So the first we had to do was we had to ask them, boss, kaun jayega Afghanistan? Sabse pehle to who will volunteer to go? And then some muscle people and James Bond type people like Bharat bhai said in our office said ke boss, main jane ke liye ready hu. So they went, and of course with proper adequate insurance and everything. But having said so, that was always a challenge. That becomes a challenge in such investigation, and with a lot of pressures that we face. I think we are always on the tightrope. So that's some big issue. Any other questions, Mr. Bakshi?
No, sir. We have only 2 questions.
Oh, fantastic. So now, Bharat bhai, would you like to conclude something before I kind of provide some comments at the end, or?
No, sir. I just want to thank you and Jyot bhai and WIRC for inviting me and listening to me so patiently. And it is, sir, a great pleasure to you being here, my mentor, and giving me insights and inputs on. It's just a very pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here, sir. That's all I just want to say. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Bharat bhai. Believe me, we have learned so much from you today. Outstanding. So I think and Jyot bhai has been also outstanding in terms of all the coordination and communication and everything. And Jyot bhai, make sure that you carry the issues to the institute, Don't forget them.
Yes.
So we
Absolutely.
carry them as a Baroda branch and WRC issues to the institute. So coming to our session, one of the examples, and again, I'm not getting into I'm just sharing some examples. So the question is, one aspect that comes to our mind is, again, chicken and egg. How do we get the assignment if I don't have the expertise? And I shared this example way back in 2003. I picked up the phone and I called up the SBI chairman when I read something about the news item in the newspapers, and I said I want to meet him. And the secretary didn't give me appointment for 3 days, and then the 4th day I went and I said, you are, today you are going for, and with due respect, you are going for multinational firms, but you must understand one thing, that the multinational firms have been promoted by the US and UK and the other governments, right? They have always promoted them. You as an SBI have to promote us, and you have to, wherever there is an opportunity, you have to give it to Indian CA firms, made in India firms, because that is how you would empower us and the nation. Now, it took virtually, and thereafter there were several joint audit papers, that we, I had prepared for the ICI also, for France, South Africa, other countries, where it is mandatory to have joint auditors, one local and one MNC. And, to our, good advantage, Bhagwan ne apni baat sun li, and this time RBI on 27th of April came out with a circular where, which was a path-breaking circular, where they said, effectively there are certain conflicts, and therefore by virtue there are a lot of Indian firms have made entries into large financial institutions, and now it is going to be next 2 years are going to be the make or break years for the Indian CA firms, and they will have to transform themselves into institutions, doing not only audits but doing also forensics at a very deep dive level, and also making sure that the professional name of the Indian CA firms is not at all tarnished. And therefore that next 2 years are crucial in terms of execution. I become so worried about execution and quality now, that in the next 2 years, because it's going to manifest into our Indianization, and it will be a make or break next 2 years, and therefore it becomes really a big challenge for us as professionals to enhance our skill sets, make sure execution is done to the T, and nobody points a finger at us, the so-called made in India firms. Because the moment one Indian firm ka naam aa gaya newspaper mein, that means all Indian firms are bad. The theory is all Indian firms are bad. That is a newspaper theory, and therefore we all need to sensitize ourselves to make sure that we deliver quality with a lot of passion, and we make sure that we do all of that. Coming back to our forensics, therefore, when I went to the example of SBI, we have always emphasized that Indian firms should get these opportunities. 1, 2, when we do forensics, we have to be prepared that हमें भी फांसी लग सकती है, and therefore we have to assume the worst case scenario and work reverse. We have to assume the worst case scenario and work reverse. Third, one of the entities where we were doing some kind of a forensic for an entire large exhibition, and they said we want the exhibition to be investigated in the last on real-time basis in 3 days and 4 days. And they said, I want to know whether the supplier has followed his SOP for the wooden panels, for the carpets, whether the stall holders are doing sales. They're not allowed to do sales in the exhibitions. So they said 3 days. They said, Mr. Chokshi, how many staff will you keep? 40, 50. Earlier people used to keep 40 and 50. I said, are you crazy? You're expecting 40 staff to be there. आप तो मेरे को पैसा तो दोगे नहीं. आप लोग तो पैसा तो दोगे नहीं. I told the clients. I will bring 12 staff. But I want 15 cameras, and I want a camera controlled room, and I want a high density camera. Okay, and my 15 staff, I said 2 will be inspecting, but the 15 people will be virtually watching you 24/7, and we picked up every camera, every angle, every stall, every carpet, every stall owner who was trying to make sales through the camera and using digital technology. And that is what I want to leave a lasting food for thought to everybody. Every process that we follow, think in terms of digitization, think in terms of automation. We have to be the world leaders. We have to be the Indian CA professional who is not the CA, conventional CA, but who's a top class technology driven chartered accountant, who will transform the chartered accountant industry into a technology driven industry in the country. And in times to come, we will be the first industry in the world to be an AI industry. Okay, forget US, forget Australia, forget other economies. We will be the first to be the AI industry, AI chartered accountants. We will not be calling ourselves CA Bharat Jeswani. We will call ourselves AI CA Bharat Jeswani. Okay, and AI CA Tauwfiq. Correct? Artificial intelligent expert CA. Correct. So we will be that, and therefore we must aim for macros. We must aim for AI. We must aim for transformation. Yes, now forensic and forensic standards are also there. The draft standards are there. So therefore, that is another good thing that institute is keeping pace with all our requirements. Therefore, we have no complaints from institute. We have to give only positive feedback to institute, and we have to open the whole field, expand, and deliver quality. I think that is the punchline that I wanted to end with. Deliver quality, and we have to be the best in the world. Continue to be the best in the world. So thank you so much for a patient hearing, and do hope that all of you can, all the members who are participants who are there can, become experts who are already experts in their respective fields, become more and more experts, and they become AI CA experts and forensic experts. All the best, and thank you so much. Over to you, Jyot Bakshi.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Bharat.
thank you, Mitil. Thank you, Mitil sir. I would like to propose a formal vote of thanks on behalf of WIRC. Sir, as you rightly explained the whole life cycle of any forensic engagement with three factors. I can put it across for all of us as participants to take home: a tripod of three things: passion to be pervasive, use of technology, and networking internally into the chartered accountants. And as we all could see, Mitil sir's enthusiasm towards technology and digitization and AI, sir, no wonder and no surprise, sir has also authored a publication for WIRC with respect to paperless office, which is also available on the WIRC website. So we should all access that also. Mitil sir, thank you once again for having shared your wisdom with all of us participants. Coming to Bharat bhai, the session was really insightful. The topics which were subdivided into whistleblower investigations, supporting the regulators and the litigation support, practical examples were really helpful for all of us. So once again, thank you, Bharat bhai, and thank you, Mitil sir, for being here with all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants for joining to the two-day workshop. We conclude the workshop. I thank everyone on behalf of WIRC. Thank you so much.
Thank you.